I swear I wasn't trying to be nosy. It was just one of those ordinary Tuesday evenings in our cramped Brooklyn apartment. Jake had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he jumped in the shower, and mine was dead in the bedroom. I needed to text Clara about meeting up later that week. Something about her cousin's wedding dress shopping. Nothing major. The apartment felt stuffy even with the windows open. Outside, I could hear the usual chaos of Flatbush Avenue, car horns, people talking loud on their phones, that guy from 4B playing his music too loud again. Jake was singing something off-key in the shower, probably that Drake song he'd been obsessed with lately. Everything felt normal, you know? Just another regular night. I picked up his phone and typed in his passcode. He'd never been secretive about it. 0829. His mom's birthday. The text app was already open to a conversation with Clara, which struck me as weird since I didn't remember them texting much lately. But I figured maybe she'd asked him something about my birthday coming up, or wanted to plan some surprise. I typed out my message quickly. Hey girl, where are you? I need to talk. Hit send and was about to put the phone down when her response came through almost instantly. That's Clara for you. Always glued to her phone, probably scrolling through TikTok or fighting with someone on Twitter. But her message made me freeze completely. Hi love. I was just thinking about last night. I stared at those words until they started to blur. Love? What did she mean by last night? Jake had been home with me last night. We'd ordered Chinese food and watched some terrible Netflix movie about time travel. He'd fallen asleep halfway through with his head on my shoulder. I remembered because I'd had to nudge him awake when the credits rolled. My hand started shaking as I held the phone. The shower was still running, Jake still singing his terrible rendition of God's Plan. Steam was probably fogging up the bathroom mirror right about now, like it did every night. But everything felt different suddenly, like the air had gotten thicker. I scrolled up through their conversation, my heart hammering against my ribs. There were messages going back weeks. Casual stuff at first. Him asking if she wanted to grab coffee. Her sending funny memes. But then things got different. More frequent. Late-night texts. Inside jokes I didn't understand. References to places they'd been together that I knew nothing about. There was one from 3 days ago where she'd sent a photo of some fancy cocktail at that new rooftop bar in Williamsburg. Thanks for tonight, she'd written. Jake had responded with a heart emoji, a fucking heart emoji, to my best friend. While I'd been at home working late, thinking he was at his buddy Marcus's place watching the game, I felt like I was going to throw up. The Chinese food from last night, or whatever night that actually was, rose in my throat. I set the phone down carefully on the counter, like it was made of glass, like it might explode if I moved too fast. The shower turned off. I could hear Jake moving around in the bathroom, probably reaching for that terrible blue towel he loved, the one with the hole in the corner that I kept threatening to throw away. In a minute, he'd come out with wet hair sticking up in all directions, probably complaining about how we needed to get the hot water heater fixed because it never stayed hot long enough. I walked to the living room and sat down on our secondhand couch, the one we'd bought from some grad student on Craigslist who was moving back to Ohio. My hands were still shaking. I pressed them between my knees and tried to breathe normally. Clara had been my best friend since freshman year at NYU. We'd met in some terrible required English class, bonding over how pretentious the professor was and how much we both hated the assigned reading. She'd been there through everything. My dad's heart attack junior year, the disaster with my first boyfriend who turned out to be seeing 3 other girls, the stress of trying to find a job after graduation. She was supposed to be my maid of honor someday, whenever Jake and I got around to getting engaged. Jake came out of the bathroom with that same blue towel around his waist, hair dripping onto his shoulders. Hey babe, you okay? You look pale. I looked at him and felt like I was seeing a stranger. This man I'd been living with for 2 years, who knew how I liked my coffee and that I got cranky if I didn't eat breakfast, who'd held my hair back when I got food poisoning from that sketchy taco truck, who'd driven me to the emergency room at 3 a.m. when I thought my appendix was bursting, but it turned out to be gas. I'm fine, I heard myself say. Just tired. He leaned down and kissed the top of my head, and I had to fight not to pull away. His lips felt foreign against my skin. I'm gonna make some tea. Want some? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He padded to the kitchen in his bare feet, and I heard him putting the kettle on, opening cabinets, doing all the normal things he did every night. But nothing felt normal anymore. Everything felt like a performance. Like we were both actors who'd forgotten we were supposed to be playing people in love. The weird thing is, I didn't cry. Not right away. It was like my brain had just switched into some kind of survival mode. The same way it did during finals week, or when my mom called with bad news about my grandmother. I sat there on the couch, listening to Jake humming in the kitchen while he made tea, and I felt completely detached from everything. He brought me a mug of chamomile tea in my favorite cup, the chipped blue one I'd stolen from the dining hall senior year. Here you go, babe. This should help you feel better. He settled down next to me and reached for the TV remote. Want to watch something? That cooking show you like is probably on. I took a sip of the tea and nodded, even though I felt like I might throw up if I put anything else in my stomach. Jake flipped through channels, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just collapsed. He landed on some Gordon Ramsay rerun and put his arm around me, pulling me against his chest like he did every night. His skin smelled like that cheap body wash he bought at Duane Reade, the same smell that used to make me feel safe and comfortable. Now it made me feel sick. I wanted to push him away, to scream at him, to throw the tea mug at his stupid face. But instead, I just sat there, letting him hold me while I planned my next move. I needed proof. Real proof. Because even though I'd seen those messages, part of me was still hoping there was some explanation. Maybe Clara was going through something, and Jake was just being a good friend. Maybe those late-night texts were about planning something for my birthday. Maybe I was being paranoid and jealous for no reason. But even as I tried to convince myself, I knew better. The way Clara had responded so quickly, calling him love, like it was natural. The heart emoji. The photo from that bar I'd never been to. It all added up to something I didn't want to acknowledge. After Jake fell asleep that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe beside me. Our bedroom window faced the courtyard, and I could hear Mrs. Chen from downstairs watching her Chinese soap operas too loud. The same ones she watched every night. Somewhere a siren was wailing down Flatbush, probably heading to Kings County Hospital. All the usual sounds of our neighborhood, but everything felt different now. I must have finally dozed off around 4 a.m. because I woke up to Jake's alarm going off at 7. He rolled over and kissed my forehead before getting up to get ready for work. "Sleep okay, babe? You were tossing and turning a lot." "Bad dreams," I mumbled, which wasn't exactly a lie. He showered and got dressed while I pretended to sleep. Before he left, he leaned down and whispered, "Love you. Have a good day." The words felt like little knives. After the front door closed behind him, I got up and made coffee with shaking hands. I called in sick to work, something I never did. My supervisor, Janet, sounded concerned because I was usually so reliable. "Take care of yourself, honey. There's some bug going around." If only she knew what kind of bug I'd caught. I spent the morning pacing around the apartment, trying to figure out what to do. I kept picking up my phone to call Clara, then putting it down again. Finally, around noon, I decided to text her, but I had to be smart about it. I couldn't let on that I knew anything. I typed out several different messages before settling on something casual. "Hey, wanna grab lunch tomorrow? I have some news to share and could use some girl talk." She responded within minutes, which should have been my first clue. Clara was a social media manager for some startup in Manhattan, and she was usually swamped during work hours. "Yes, I'd love to catch up. Is everything okay? You sound mysterious." That winky face emoji made me want to throw my phone across the room. Here she was, acting like my concerned best friend when she'd been sneaking around with my boyfriend behind my back. The fake concern in her message was almost worse than the betrayal itself. "Everything's great. Just some exciting stuff happening. Let's meet at that place in Park Slope you like. The one with the good sandwiches? Perfect. 1 p.m., can't wait to hear your news." A heart emoji. She sent me a fucking heart emoji while she was sleeping with Jake. The audacity was incredible. I spent the rest of the day rehearsing what I was going to say to her. I imagined myself staying calm and collected, laying out the evidence like a prosecutor in a courtroom drama. I imagined her breaking down and confessing everything, begging for forgiveness. I imagined myself walking away with my dignity intact. But mostly, I just felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me, and left just an empty shell walking around in my clothes. I tried to eat something for dinner, but everything tasted like cardboard. I tried to watch TV, but couldn't focus on anything. I even tried to take a bath, thinking the hot water might help me relax. But I just sat there in the tub feeling numb. Jake came home around 8 with takeout from our favorite Thai place. "Thought you might be hungry since you stayed home sick," he said, kissing my cheek. Such a thoughtful boyfriend. Such a caring gesture. It made me want to scream. We ate pad thai and spring rolls while watching the news, and Jake told me about his day at the marketing firm where he worked. His boss was being a pain about some campaign deadline. One of his coworkers had gotten engaged. Normal, everyday conversation between two people who were supposed to love each other. "How are you feeling?" he asked, reaching over to feel my forehead. "You still look a little pale." "Much better," I lied. "I think I just needed to rest." That night, I lay awake again while Jake slept peacefully next to me. I watched the digital clock on his nightstand flip from 12:59 to 1 sao, then 1:01, then 1:02. I wondered if Clara was lying awake too, thinking about him. Or maybe she was sleeping soundly, not bothered at all by what she was doing to me. Tomorrow, I would have answers. Tomorrow, I would confront her with what I knew and see what happened. But tonight, I just lay there in the dark, mourning the end of everything I thought I had. I woke up that Thursday morning with a weird sense of clarity, like when you finally decide to quit a job you hate or break up with someone you know isn't right for you. The decision was made. I was going to get answers, and then I was going to figure out what to do with my life. I took extra time getting ready, which was unusual for me. Normally I just threw on whatever clean clothes were closest and called it good. But that morning, I stood in front of my closet for 10 minutes, finally settling on my favorite black jeans and the navy blue sweater Jake always said brought out my eyes. Not because I cared what he thought anymore, but because I needed to feel like myself, like someone who had her shit together, even if everything was falling apart. Jake was already gone by the time I got to the kitchen. He'd left me a note next to the coffee maker. "Hope you're feeling better today. Love you." I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, then immediately felt bad and fished it out again. I wasn't ready to start throwing things away yet. The cafe Clara had picked was called Buttermilk, this trendy little place on Fifth Avenue that served overpriced sandwiches to young professionals who worked in Manhattan but lived in Brooklyn because they couldn't afford the city. Clara loved places like this, somewhere she could take Instagram photos of her avocado toast and feel sophisticated. I got there 15 minutes early and chose a table near the back, somewhere we could talk without the entire restaurant listening in. The place was packed with the usual lunch crowd, people in expensive jeans typing on MacBooks, mothers with fancy strollers meeting for their weekly catch-up, a few guys in suits who probably worked at one of the banks downtown. I ordered a coffee I didn't want and checked my phone obsessively. Clara was usually late to everything, a habit that had annoyed me for years, but that I'd learned to accept. Today, her chronic lateness felt like torture. Every minute that passed gave me more time to think, to imagine how this conversation would go, to lose my nerve. She showed up at 1:17, looking exactly like she always did. Perfectly messy blonde hair, expensive leather jacket that she'd saved up for months to buy, that confident smile that made everyone want to be her friend. When she spotted me, her face lit up the way it always did, and for a split second, I almost forgot why I was there. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the chair across from me and immediately pulling off her jacket. The subway was a nightmare. Some guy passed out on the N train and we sat in the tunnel for like 20 minutes. She leaned across the table to hug me, and I let her, breathing in her familiar perfume and feeling my resolve waver. "No worries," I said, even though we both knew I hated when people were late. "I already ordered. You want your usual?" She nodded and flagged down our server, a young guy with carefully styled hair and several visible tattoos. "Turkey club, no mayo, extra avocado, and an iced coffee with oat milk," she rattled off, then turned back to me with eager eyes. "Okay, so what's this big news? You sounded so mysterious yesterday." I reached into my purse and pulled out Jake's phone, which I'd borrowed again that morning while he was in the shower. I'd thought about screenshotting the conversation and sending it to myself, but something about having the actual phone felt more real, more undeniable. "I saw something yesterday," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected it to be. Something I wasn't supposed to see. I placed the phone on the table between us, the screen still open to their text conversation. Clara glanced down at it, and I watched her face change in real time. The smile faded first, then her cheeks went pale. Then her eyes got wide with something that looked like panic. "I can explain," she said immediately, which was basically a confession right there. "Can you?" I kept my voice calm, even though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. "Because I'm really curious how you're going to explain calling my boyfriend love and talking about spending the night with him." Clara's hands were shaking as she reached for her water glass. She took a sip, then another, clearly buying time while she figured out what to say. The restaurant noise, clinking dishes, conversation, the espresso machine hissing, felt impossibly loud around us. "It's not what it looks like," she finally said, which was such a cliche that I almost laughed. "What does it look like, Clara? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my best friend has been sleeping with my boyfriend behind my back." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I felt bad for her. This was Clara, who'd held my hair back when I was drunk, who'd helped me move apartments 3 times, who'd been there for every major moment in my adult life. But then I remembered those text messages, and the sympathy evaporated. "How long?" I asked. She wiped her eyes with her napkin, smearing her mascara slightly. It's complicated." "How long?" 3 months, she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear her over the noise of the restaurant. 3 months. While I was planning our future, thinking about whether we should get a bigger apartment, whether we were ready to talk about marriage, Clara had been sneaking around with Jake for 3 months. Why? The word came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was past caring about being polite. Clara looked around the restaurant like she was hoping someone would come rescue her from this conversation. When no help arrived, she took a deep breath and looked directly at me for the first time since I'd put the phone on the table. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said. "We ran into each other at that bar in Williamsburg. You know, the one with the rooftop? You were working late on that big project, and I was there with some people from work, and he was there with Marcus and those guys." I remembered that night. I'd been stressed about a presentation, and had stayed at the office until almost midnight, coming home to find Jake already asleep. We just started talking, and then everyone else left, and we were both pretty drunk. She trailed off, like that explained everything. "So you decided to sleep with him?" "It wasn't like that. It was just supposed to be one time. We both felt terrible about it afterward. But then what?" Clara's face crumpled, and she started crying in earnest now. "I don't know how to explain it. Being with him made me feel close to you somehow, like I could understand what you saw in him, what made you happy. And then it just kept happening." I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "You kept sleeping with my boyfriend because it made you feel close to me. I know how it sounds. It sounds insane, Clara. It sounds like the most fucked up thing I've ever heard." The people at the table next to us turned to stare, and I realized I'd raised my voice. I didn't care. Let them look. Let them hear about what a terrible person my best friend was. "There's something else," Clara said quietly. I felt my stomach drop. What else could there possibly be? She looked down at her hands, which were twisted together in her lap. The reason I kept seeing him. It wasn't just about feeling close to you. It was because what? When she looked up at me, her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "Because I'm in love with you. I have been for years, and being with Jake was the closest I could get to being with you." The words hung in the air between us like smoke, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Clara was staring at me with this desperate look, like she was waiting for me to say something that would make everything okay. But I had no idea what to say. My brain felt like it had just short-circuited. "You're in love with me," I repeated slowly, trying to make sense of it. "So you slept with my boyfriend." I know it doesn't make sense. No, Clara, it really doesn't. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and sharp. "You're telling me that your solution to having feelings for me was to betray me in the worst possible way?" She was crying harder now, attracting more stares from other tables. The server had brought her sandwich, but it sat untouched between us. "I never meant for it to go this far," That first night, I was just so confused and hurt because you seemed so happy with him, and I'd been carrying these feelings around for so long." "How long?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Since sophomore year. Maybe earlier." She wiped her nose with her napkin. "Remember when you dated that guy Derek, and you were so miserable all the time? I hated seeing you with him, but I told myself it was just because he was wrong for you. And then when you broke up, I was so relieved, but I didn't understand why. I did remember Derek. He'd been my first serious boyfriend in college, and Clara had never liked him. She'd always found reasons to criticize him. He was too controlling, too immature, not good enough for me. At the time, I thought she was just being protective. And then, when you started dating Jake, I thought maybe the feelings would go away because he actually made you happy. But they didn't. They got worse. Clara's voice was getting smaller, like she was shrinking into herself. Watching you two together, seeing how much you loved him, it killed me. And I hated myself for feeling that way because you're my best friend, and I should want you to be happy." The restaurant felt too hot suddenly. I pulled off my sweater and draped it over the back of my chair, trying to process everything she was telling me. All those years of friendship, all those late-night conversations about guys and relationships and dreams for the future. Had she been thinking about me differently the entire time? "So, when you ran into Jake that night?" I prompted. Clara nodded miserably. "We were both drunk, and he was complaining about how you'd been working so much lately, how you were always stressed, and I was drunk and stupid and angry at myself for loving someone who could never love me back. When he suggested we go somewhere quieter to talk, you went back to his place. It wasn't a question. To my place, actually. My roommate was out of town." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I kept thinking about you the whole time. About how I was touching someone who had touched you. Someone who knew what you looked like when you laughed, what you sounded like when you were sleeping. It was sick, I know that. But I couldn't stop. I felt nauseous. The thought of Clara thinking about me while she was with Jake made my skin crawl. And you kept seeing him because it was the closest I could get to you." Her voice broke on the words. "I know how twisted that sounds. I know how fucked up it is. But when I was with him, I could pretend that I understood what it felt like to be loved by you, even if it wasn't real. The worst part was that I could see the logic in it. As sick as it was, Clara had always been intense about our friendship, always a little possessive when I dated other people. I'd chalked it up to her being protective, maybe a little jealous of losing my attention. I'd never considered that it might be something deeper. "Does Jake know?" I asked. "About your feelings for me?" Clara shook her head quickly. "God, no. He thinks I was just lonely and attracted to him. He has no idea that it was really about you. That almost made it worse somehow. At least if Jake had known the real reason, there would have been some acknowledgement of how fucked up the whole situation was. But he'd just been cheating on me with my best friend, probably feeling guilty but not understanding the full scope of the betrayal." "Clara." I leaned forward, making her look at me. "Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed my relationship and our friendship because you couldn't deal with your own feelings like an adult." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." My voice was getting louder again, but I didn't care. "You could have told me how you felt. You could have gotten therapy. You could have put some distance between us until you figured your shit out. Instead, you decided to handle it by sleeping with my boyfriend for 3 months. Clara was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me. You hurt me in a way that I didn't even know was possible." I felt tears starting in my own eyes, but I blinked them back. I wasn't going to cry here, not in front of her. And the worst part is that you kept lying to my face every single day, asking me how things were going with Jake, giving me advice about our relationship, pretending to be my friend while you were betraying me. I am your friend. I love you. That's not love, Clara. That's obsession. That's selfishness. Love doesn't look like this. She flinched like I'd hit her, which maybe I had, emotionally speaking. But I was past caring about her feelings. She'd had 3 months to think about mine, and she'd chosen to ignore them. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. I looked at her sitting across from me. this person who had been such a huge part of my life for so many years. I thought about all the memories we shared, all the inside jokes and shared experiences that had made us feel like sisters. All of it felt contaminated now, tainted by the knowledge that she'd been carrying these feelings and these secrets the entire time. "Now I leave," I said, standing up and putting my sweater back on. "And you figure out how to live with what you've done." "Wait, please." But I was already walking away, leaving her sitting alone at the table with her untouched sandwich and her tears. I pushed through the crowd of lunch customers and out onto Fifth Avenue, where the spring air felt sharp and clean after the stuffiness of the restaurant. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching people walk by with their normal lives and their normal problems. A woman pushing a stroller, talking on her phone about some work deadline. A delivery guy on a bike, weaving through traffic. An elderly man walking his small dog, stopping every few feet to let it sniff interesting smells. All of them probably had their own drama, their own heartbreak, their own complicated relationships. But right then, I felt completely alone in mine. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't face Jake yet, couldn't pretend everything was normal when my entire world had just been turned upside down. Instead, I found myself walking aimlessly through Park Slope, past the brownstones with their perfect stoops and the organic coffee shops full of new parents with expensive strollers. My phone kept buzzing with texts from Clara. I could see the previews lighting up my screen. "Please let me explain. I know you hate me, but can we please talk?" I turned it off completely and shoved it deep in my purse. I ended up in Prospect Park somehow, sitting on a bench near the lake where families were feeding ducks and joggers were running past with their headphones on. It was one of those perfect spring afternoons that makes you believe everything will be okay, but I felt like I was watching it all from behind glass. The thing that kept hitting me over and over was how long it had been going on. 3 months. That meant Clara had been lying to my face through my birthday dinner in March, when she'd toasted to friendship and honesty and given me that expensive candle I'd been wanting. She'd been sleeping with Jake when we'd had that girls' night 2 weeks ago, when she'd painted my nails and we'd talked about whether I should move in with him permanently or keep paying for my own room. All those conversations about Jake. All those times she'd asked how things were going between us. All her advice about relationships. It had all been fake. She'd been sitting there with this massive secret, this betrayal, and she'd looked me in the eye and pretended to care about my happiness. I sat on that bench until the sun started getting lower in the sky, and the park began to empty out. Families packed up their picnic blankets, joggers headed home to shower before dinner, couples walked hand in hand toward the exits. Eventually, I knew I had to face reality. I had to go home and deal with Jake. The apartment felt different when I walked in, like it belonged to strangers. Jake was in the kitchen making dinner, pasta with that jarred sauce he always used when I wasn't around to cook something more elaborate. He looked up when he heard the door, and his face immediately showed concern. "Hey, how was lunch with Clara? You look upset." I stood in the doorway, studying his face. He looked genuinely worried, like the caring boyfriend he'd always been. It made everything more confusing. If he'd been obviously guilty or suspicious, it would have been easier. But he just looked like Jake, the same guy who brought me tea when I was sick, who listened to me complain about work, who knew exactly how I liked my eggs in the morning. "Jake," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk." Something in my tone must have warned him, because his expression changed. He turned off the burner and wiped his hands on the dish towel, then leaned against the counter like he was bracing himself. "Okay," he said carefully. "What's going on?" I reached into my purse and pulled out his phone, the same way I had with Clara a few hours earlier. His face went completely white when he saw it. "I saw your messages," I said simply. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the kitchen. I could hear the upstairs neighbor walking around, the sound of traffic from the street, the refrigerator humming, all the normal sounds of our life together. But everything had changed. "Fuck," he said quietly, running his hands through his hair. "Fuck, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, I didn't know how." At least he wasn't going to lie about it. I'd been prepared for denials, for him to try to convince me I was misunderstanding what I'd seen. His immediate confession was almost worse somehow. "How long?" I asked, even though I already knew. 3 months. He looked down at his feet. It started that night you were working late on the Morrison project. I ran into Clara at a bar, and we were both drunk, and it just happened. And then it kept happening. Yeah. His voice was barely above a whisper. I kept telling myself it would stop, that it was just a mistake we both made. But then she'd text me, or I'd see her when she came over here, and you'd fuck my best friend while I was at work. He flinched at my bluntness. It wasn't like that. It didn't mean anything. It meant something to me, Jake. It meant everything to me. I watched him struggle with what to say, his face cycling through guilt and shame and what looked like relief that the secret was finally out. He'd probably been carrying around this weight for months, lying to me every day, pretending everything was normal when he was betraying me in the worst possible way. "Are you in love with her?" I asked. "No." His answer came quickly, definitively. "No, it was never about that. I love you. I've always loved you." "Then why?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at the pasta pot on the stove like it might give him answers. Finally, he looked back at me. "I don't know. I really don't know." It was like I couldn't help myself. Every time I told myself it was over, that I wasn't going to see her again, she'd reach out or we'd end up in the same place and I'd lose my resolve. "She told me something today," I said. "Something about why she kept sleeping with you." Jake looked confused. "What do you mean?" "She's in love with me, Jake. She has been for years. She said being with you was the closest she could get to being with me." His face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on horror. "What? That's insane." "Yeah, it is." I felt exhausted suddenly, like I'd been running for hours. "So, congratulations. You both used each other to get to me, and you destroyed everything in the process." Jesus Christ. Jake sat down heavily at our small kitchen table, putting his head in his hands. "I had no idea. She never said. I thought she was just lonely or whatever. Would it have mattered if you'd known?" He looked up at me with red eyes. "I don't know. Maybe. Probably. This is so fucked up." We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of everything settling between us like a physical presence. The pasta water was still boiling on the stove, making little bubbling sounds that seemed too cheerful for the moment. "What happens now?" Jake asked finally, echoing Clara's question from earlier. I looked around our kitchen, at the mismatched dishes we'd collected over 2 years, the magnetic poetry on the refrigerator that we used to rearrange when we were bored, the coffee maker we'd bought together when we decided we were spending too much money at cafes, all the little signs of a life built together. "Now you pack your things," I said quietly, "and you leave. Can we talk about this? Can we try to work through it?" I shook my head. "There's nothing to work through, Jake. You made your choice every single day for 3 months. You chose her over me, over us, over everything we built together. It wasn't a choice. It was a mistake. It was 100 choices. Every text you sent her, every lie you told me, every time you came home and kissed me after being with her." I stood up, suddenly desperate to get out of that kitchen, away from him. It was a choice every single time. I went to our bedroom and started pulling clothes out of my dresser, shoving them into the duffel bag I used for weekend trips. Jake followed me, standing in the doorway like he was afraid to come closer. "Where are you going?" he asked. "My sister's place." I didn't look at him as I packed. "I'll come back for the rest of my stuff when you're not here. This is your apartment too. You shouldn't have to leave. I can't stay here tonight, Jake. I can't sleep in the bed where you probably fucked her. We didn't do it here. Never." I stopped packing and stared at him. "You think that makes it better? You think I care where you cheated on me?" "No, I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say." I zipped up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. "We're done. Get your stuff and get out." I walked past him toward the front door, but he caught my arm gently. "I love you," he said desperately. "I know I fucked everything up, but I do love you. That was never fake." I looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the last time. This person who had been such a huge part of my life, who I'd imagined a future with, who I'd trusted completely. I tried to find some trace of that love I used to feel for him, some spark that might make me want to fight for us. But there was nothing, just emptiness where those feelings used to be. I loved you too, I said quietly. But that's over now. I walked out of our apartment and didn't look back. My sister Emma lived in a studio apartment in Astoria that was somehow even smaller than the place Jake and I had shared. She was 3 years older than me and worked as a nurse at Mount Sinai, which meant she kept weird hours and lived on a steady diet of takeout and energy drinks. When I showed up at her door at 9 o'clock that night with my duffel bag and red eyes, she took one look at me and pulled me inside without asking any questions. "Wine or vodka?" she asked, heading straight to her tiny kitchen. "Both," I said, dropping my bag by the door and collapsing onto her couch, which also served as her dining room table and home office, depending on the time of day. Emma poured 2 enormous glasses of cheap red wine and settled in next to me. She was still wearing her scrubs from work, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun that was identical to mine when I couldn't be bothered to do anything with it. People always said we looked alike, but Emma was the prettier, more put-together version, the one who'd figured out how to be an adult while I was still stumbling through life making terrible decisions about men. "Okay," she said, handing me a glass. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about finding the messages on Jake's phone, about confronting Clara at lunch, about the twisted confession that had made everything so much worse. I told her about coming home to Jake and seeing the guilt written all over his face, about packing my bag while he stood there trying to explain the unexplainable. Emma listened without interrupting, occasionally refilling our wine glasses or making small sounds of disbelief. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wine like it might have answers. "Jesus fucking Christ," she finally said, which pretty much summed up how I felt about the whole situation. "I know. Clara's been in love with you this whole time? Apparently. And she thought sleeping with your boyfriend was a reasonable way to handle that? That's what she said." Emma shook her head slowly. "That's some next-level fucked-up psychology right there. Like, she needs serious therapy. Maybe medication." I laughed, but it came out bitter and harsh. "Yeah, well, that's not my problem anymore." "Good. It shouldn't be." Emma curled her legs under her and studied my face. "How are you holding up?" "Really?" I thought about it. I feel like someone scooped out my insides with a spoon. Like everything I thought I knew about my life was just a lie. That's because it was, in a way. But not all of it. You're still you. You're still smart and funny, and way too good for both of them. I stayed at Emma's place for 2 weeks. She gave me her couch, and didn't complain when I cried at random times, or when I ate all her ice cream, or when I refused to shower for 3 days straight. She brought me tissues and terrible reality TV, and listened to me analyze every moment of my relationship with Jake, looking for signs I'd missed. The signs had been there, I realized. The way he'd started working late more often, claiming new projects at the marketing firm. The way he'd become more attentive to me, bringing me flowers for no reason and suggesting romantic dinner dates. Classic guilty boyfriend behavior. The way he'd started being weird about his phone, taking it with him to the bathroom and flipping it face down when he put it on the counter. Clara had been subtler, but there were signs there too. The way she'd ask detailed questions about Jake and our relationship, claiming she just wanted to make sure I was happy. The way she'd sometimes seem distracted when we hung out, like her mind was somewhere else. The way she'd gotten a little too interested in my sex life, wanting to know intimate details that I'd shared because I thought she was just being a good friend. Both of them had been lying to me for months, and I'd been too trusting, too naive, too secure in my relationships to notice. My phone buzzed constantly those first few days. Texts from Clara that I deleted without reading, calls from Jake that I sent straight to voicemail. Emma finally convinced me to block both of their numbers after Clara showed up at my office building one day, trying to ambush me in the lobby. Security had to escort her out while she cried and begged me to listen to her explanation. "There's nothing left to explain," I told Emma that night. She said everything she needed to say at that restaurant. After 2 weeks of sleeping on Emma's couch and wallowing in self-pity, my sister finally gave me the tough love I needed. "Okay, enough," she said one morning, pulling the blanket off me and opening the curtains to let in the harsh morning light. "You need to get your shit together." "I'm processing," I mumbled, trying to grab the blanket back. "You're wallowing. There's a difference." Emma sat down on the edge of the couch and looked at me seriously. "Look, what they did was shitty, beyond shitty. But you can't let it destroy your entire life. It feels like it already has. Only if you let it. You've got to decide. Are you going to let these two assholes define your story, or are you going to write your own ending? She was right, even though I didn't want to admit it. I'd been so focused on what Clara and Jake had taken from me that I hadn't thought about what I could take back. That afternoon, I called my landlord and asked about getting Jake's name off the lease. I went back to the apartment when I knew he'd be at work and packed up everything that was mine. Clothes, books, the coffee maker we'd bought together that I'd paid for, the plants I'd been nurturing on the fire escape. I left behind anything that reminded me of him, anything that felt contaminated by their betrayal. Jake had left me a letter on the kitchen counter, pages and pages of apologies and explanations and promises to change. I threw it away without reading it. I found a new place in Williamsburg, a tiny one-bedroom that was more expensive than I could really afford, but felt like a fresh start. Emma helped me move, making jokes about my terrible decorating choices, and insisting I needed at least one plant that wasn't dying. "You're going to be okay," she said, as we collapsed on my new couch. A secondhand love seat I'd found on Facebook Marketplace, surrounded by boxes and takeout containers from the Thai place down the street. "Yeah," I said, and for the first time in weeks I actually believed it. The hardest part wasn't missing Jake, which surprised me. Once the initial shock wore off, I realized I was more angry than heartbroken about losing him. What hurt more was losing Clara, losing the friendship I'd thought was unshakable. I'd loved her like a sister, trusted her with everything, and she'd used that trust to betray me in the most personal way possible. But slowly, I started to rebuild. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and staying late to avoid going home to my empty apartment. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected while I was wrapped up in my relationship with Jake. I started going to yoga classes and learning to cook actual meals instead of surviving on takeout and cereal. 3 months after everything fell apart, I was walking through Central Park on a Saturday morning when I saw them. Clara and Jake, sitting on a bench near the reservoir, his arm around her shoulders while she leaned into him. They looked comfortable together, familiar, like they'd been a couple for years, instead of whatever twisted thing they actually were. I stopped walking and just stared at them for a moment. Clara was wearing the same leather jacket she'd had on that day at the restaurant, and Jake was in his favorite blue shirt, the one I used to steal when I slept over at his place. They looked happy, which should have made me furious, but instead just made me feel empty. Clara looked up and saw me across the path. Our eyes met for a split second, and I saw her face change. Surprise, then guilt, then something that might have been hope. She started to stand up, like she was going to come over and try to talk to me. I turned around and walked away. Not because I was running from them, but because I had better things to do with my Saturday morning than deal with their drama. I had a life to rebuild, and they weren't part of it anymore. That night, I called Emma and told her what I'd seen. "How do you feel about it?" she asked. "Free," I said, and realized I meant it. I feel free.